Hey GCG Nation, Marcello here from GameCube Galaxy, and today I'm going to be showcasing to you guys two modern accessories for the Switch that are actually GameCube related. Those are the handheld controller for Switch and the NYXI Wizard. So just a heads up, the handheld controller was sent to me as a review unit several months ago, and I've been kind of holding off on reviewing this because when I got wind of the NYXI Wizard, I figured this would be kind of a fun video to showcase which item would probably be worth more bang for buck. So yeah, that's why it's kind of been a while since I've talked about this. If you follow me on Instagram, you've seen me post about this. But I just got my hands on the NYXI Wizard, which I actually purchased with my own money. Despite the fact that one was sent as a review unit and one I spent my own money, these are going to be my honest thoughts on both devices. So let's dive in. So the first thing I want to talk about is the handheld controller for Switch. The first aspect to note is that the handheld controller for Switch is very much aiming to appease fans of the GameCube, with the analog and C sticks replicating the look and feel of those original sticks, as well as the face buttons and triggers matching the color of the respective console's controller. Additionally, the D-pad is also an actual D-pad, much like the GameCube controller itself, but is definitely bigger. The analog stick and C stick both feel great here, with smooth motion overall. The face buttons all have a bit more travel to them than the Joy-Con's clicky buttons, but it does have quite a nice feel to it. The plus and minus buttons, as well as the screenshot and home buttons, do have the clickier feel to it though. The ZL and ZR triggers do feel more like the Switch Pro controller's triggers, where there's the slight bit of travel to them versus the Joy-Con's clickier ones, but I always prefer the Pro controller's feel overall, so I'm very content with this move. The L and R buttons also replicate that of the Pro controller's feel, and they just feel spot on. Additionally, there is vibration built into the controller, but it is a standard rumble and not the HD rumble technology that is in the actual Joy-Con and Pro controller. There is also no IR sensor built into this, but aside from 1-2 Switch, Resident Evil Revelations, and a very select few other games, there isn't really an issue here with that omission. Now, this handheld controller is strictly that, a handheld attachment that can only be used when undocked. This single piece design is made to fit both the original model Switch as well as the newer OLED models with ease. Placing the OLED model in here feels perfectly snug and secure, and the felt padding where the back of the Switch console rests truly is a nice touch. In terms of setting this up, you will need to enable the Pro Controller wired communication within the console settings under the Controllers and Sensors tab. Once enabled, I first noticed it didn't read the handheld device right away. I decided to do an actual console restart, at which point it read the handheld controller without issue. Everything works as you would expect, but it is worth noting that you cannot wake up your Switch from sleep mode by simply pressing the home button. You will need to actually press the power button on the top of the Switch to wake the console. The controller itself does have a great feel to it, and it is very ergonomic. There is a bit of weight to it though, and you will feel that when you're playing the Switch late at night if you're tired from a long day's work. Now, I mentioned the controller has a turbo button. To program a button to have turbo mode, you'll simply press and hold this turbo button down, followed by the button of your choice to enable. You'll know you've activated that button for turbo mode because the controller will vibrate to confirm this. It is worth noting that you can only program a single button at a time to enable turbo mode. If you want to enable another button, you will need to deactivate the currently activated button first, followed by the next button to activate. You can also do button swaps. Holding down two different buttons and then pressing the turbo button down will swap those two buttons for use. So, if a game doesn't have a button layout that you like and doesn't provide for custom controls in-game, this is a nice alternative to that. In comparison to the Joy-Cons being attached to the Switch, the handheld controller for Switch clearly has a bulkier feel to it. The size and weight are noticeable, but does feel good for the most part during extended play sessions. For a while I started thinking this may be the main way I begin playing my Switch games in handheld mode. But occasionally when I'd plug the Joy-Cons back in, there was something about the slimmer form factor that still just felt right. That being said though, what is here still feels great. The sticks themselves have a great feel to it, and I could not detect any dead zone when rotating the analog sticks. Everything just feels responsive and has a nice build quality overall. Now, with the console attached to this, I was curious if the audio output would be affected. While I don't have the original model anymore to test out, here is an audio comparison off camera when the volume is maxed out on the OLED when plugged into the handheld controller, as well as a comparison where it's just the Joy-Cons. So, what do you guys think? Does it sound about the same to you? As much as I love this handheld controller, there are some gripes I have with it too. First off, it's a shame that they couldn't get the octagonal casing around the analog stick and C-stick. Part of what makes the GameCube sticks flawless is that design. The next thing is that there is no NFC reader on this, so if you're looking to scan your amiibos depending on the game you're playing, this controller won't have that functionality. Another aspect that's worth noting is that you cannot fit this in the console dock, but the bottom does have a USB-C pass-through to charge the console through the case itself. Also, while you can swap out game cards with the controller attached, the game card door doesn't have as much flexibility to open up. While I already can't stand how tough it is to pop open the game card door on the OLED model, this made it even more stiff than it already was. Now, let's check out the NYXI Wizard. This is a controller that aims to replicate more of the look and feel of the controller it's trying to mimic. The face buttons emulate the look of the original GameCube controller, as do the stick placements and D-pad placement. Additionally, the face buttons illuminate and give it a stylish appearance. Both the analog stick and C-stick have the octagonal cutouts around the perimeter and can even be swapped out if you have your own sticks to replace here. There are also the L, R, ZL, and ZR buttons on the top, as well as the FL and FR buttons behind the controller, which are programmable buttons, but more on that shortly. There are also two separate turbo buttons on each side of the controller, as well as two profile buttons and the traditional menu, capture, plus and minus buttons from the Switch controller's layout. And of course, the catch with this controller is that you can detach the controller into two parts and attach them to your Switch for that handheld GameCube playstyle. Now, the console does look pretty massive when you're using them this way, but the extra depth does allow for the Switch to be docked when these are still attached. Now, the controller allows for turbo functionality. Simply hold down the turbo button on either side of the controller, and then press any button or D-pad direction that you want to have that feature. You can also tap the turbo buttons to adjust the speed of the turbo effect. If you hold the turbo button down for 3 seconds, it will reset the programmed turbo buttons and shut it off. Additionally are the programmable buttons as mentioned earlier on each side of the controller. Pressing the profile button, you can input up to 21 button commands and then press the profile again to lock in that combination you pressed. Once you've recorded that combination, you can then press the FL or FR button depending on the profile button you've locked it in with. Macro buttons essentially play out a sequence of button presses you've initiated. This is handy for things like pulling off certain combos in action games like Ninja Gaiden to pulling off crazy combos in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Also, what is nice is that the controller has LEDs that let you know whether the rear buttons are enabled or even the turbo buttons. Now, here are the gripes I do have with this specific controller. For starters, the ZL and ZR triggers are incredibly clicky for my taste. Whereas the Retroflag Handheld Controller mimics that of the Switch Pro controller, this just feels, well, cheap. As for the D-pad here, yikes. So the D-pad is super stiff, and it reminds me a bit of a hybrid of the Dreamcast stiff D-pad with the Xbox One controller's awful clicky D-pad response, yet it's somehow worse than those combined. Rather than a more comfortable, ergonomic feel, it's rigid and provides minimal feedback on when you're pressing the D-pad in the direction you are going. Additionally, it's even more frustrating knowing how easily it will read diagonal presses with little effort, which can cause frustration with controls in certain games. Also, as neat as the FL and FR rear buttons are, they are far too easy to press in. They sit easily along your fingers in the back of the controller, and I found myself accidentally pressing them just from casually holding the controller itself. Another odd aspect that came to mind was that each side of the controller has a USB-C charging port, and unless you're charging the controllers as Joy-Cons and docking it to charge them, you will need to charge each controller side individually. Again, I'm sure most people will just charge it when docked with the Switch itself, but if you're not, this is kind of odd. Lastly, since the controller is very light, when attaching them handheld to the Switch console itself, the weight distribution feels quite off and it isn't all that enticing to use for long stretches of gaming. So, between both controllers, which one do I recommend overall? Honestly, as much as I love the aesthetic design and ideas behind the NYXI Wizard, the controller has a less than stellar D-pad and cheaply designed ZL and ZR triggers that really takes it away from being an awesome controller. I still don't mind using it, but I don't quite love it as much as I thought I would have, especially for the $70 asking price. On the flip side, the Retroflag Handheld Controller might be missing some GameCube aesthetics like the face buttons and is also strictly for handheld use as the name implies, but the controller feels far more well designed and ergonomic overall. And while a little steep for $50, this one is worth it for sure. That being said, I don't dislike the NYXI Wizard enough to not recommend it to GameCube fans playing Switch games. It just needs some refinements to truly make it worth the asking price. I hope you guys enjoyed this comparison, and if you have any other questions about either of these controllers, feel free to comment below. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will catch you all in the next episode.